One of the most critical details in any building is the junction between the windowsill and the wall itself. It's often a weak point in the building, somewhere that energy can seep through, somewhere that water can get into the building, and often a place that failure happens. So today we're going to dive into how best to work out this detail. It's a generic detail. It can work in multiple different types of wall scenarios. What we're really doing here is showing the principles, showing how best to align things and the general principles, keeping water out, keeping energy within the wall itself. So here it is. Let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to draw out this detail really kind of in the sequence that construction would have it built. The detail itself, let's just think of it as generic. There's a million different ways to build a wall. What we're talking about here is kind of best practice principles generally in regard to the layering and positioning of things, and how that can make it into a high performance type detail. So let's just draw it out. The first thing we would draw in this detail is the structure itself, which in this case is going to be a timber stud. Okay, so we've got a timber stud which is going to support our window frame at the top. Now, the one thing that we always look to do here is from the very start, protect the building internal. This is the internal side, this is the external, from any incoming water that could get into the building. One of the best ways to do that is to actually put what's called a backstop on top of the frame itself. And what this does is it does what the term says. It stops any incoming water from coming through by creating a barrier for it. And we're going to place our window hard against this so that it creates that buffer. It's something that stops that wind blowing direction getting through. So here we have our timber stud. The next thing we want to do with our timber stud is we want to ensure it's wrapped on the outside with what's called our weather resistant barrier, or WRB. And I'm just going to draw it in here in blue, and it's going to come the whole way up and over the top of the backstop. And we are then going to tape this at this point over the edge of this. So this creates a nice protective layer to our stud. So no water is going to get through this. This is a breathable membrane so that we can allow any moisture that's inside the building here to get out, but no moisture is allowed to come in. It's what's called a smart membrane. Okay, so that is protecting our building really nicely there. Next thing we would do is we would put our rain screen cladding on. So in this case, we're going to create a brickwork facade on the outside here. So we'll draw in some bricks at this point, leaving a cavity between the bricks themselves and the timber frame behind. Okay, so here's our brickwork. We've got our mortar joints in here, and it's set off with a gap between here. So this gap is really important because what we want to do is allow air gaps at the bottom of this wall to allow ventilation to get into this cavity. And you'll see in a moment, I then want to ensure that we get the ability of this to to ventilate back out at the top. So we get constant circulation of air through and behind this brickwork that keeps any moisture that gets onto this membrane nice and dry, and it's being dried constantly by this movement of air that naturally happens in this space. Okay, so that's the basic premise of the wall, I suppose, built into place. Now, the next thing we would do here is we would place the window frame. And the placement of this window frame is very critical. It's very critical because what we want to do is we want to ensure that there is a nice, neat line between the insulated stud, which is going to be here, and the main portion of the window itself. We want that thermal line effectively between the contours between hot and cool to run as straight as possible through this detail. We don't want it sitting out here, because then there would be this zigzag effect in the thermal envelope itself, and that creates breaks and creates opportunities for cold spots to happen in this frame. So what we want to do is place our window frame that sits neatly in here. Now I'm drawing very generic window frame shapes and so on here. This could be thermally broken aluminium, it could be timber, it could be all sorts of different materials that you could make it, UPVC, etc. So that's our window frame in there, and then we're going to glaze it. So in this case I'm just showing double glazed, 2 panes of glass that sit into that. Okay, so you can see the thermal line, which is the glass here, the gap between the 2 panes of glass, is actually our insulated layer in the window. The window frame itself is either timber or some sort of material that's not conducting heat from one side to the other, or if it is, then we've got what's called a thermal break in the middle, an insulated material which is connecting or disconnecting the inside and the outside and making sure that this insulated layer carries through. Okay, so that's sitting where we want it to be, approximately in that position. Again, this is diagrammatic. I'm not showing how we're fixing this or anything. I'm just showing it in regard to the ideal position for it. Now, there's one thing that we need to do with this window frame before we installed it, and that is we need to attach an airtight membrane onto the underside of this window, and we are going to wrap it up and over the top of the other membrane on top of this. So this is going to be really key in regard to connecting our airtight layers together, ensuring everything's working. So we've got it on the bottom of the frame, it's wrapping up and over the top of our backstop. And then on the inside of our timber stud, we're going to put the weather or the airproof membrane on the inside, ARB. Okay, and then we are going to tape these two together in that location. And now we've got a nice seamless connection from the inside airtight layer connecting underneath and around this backstop and onto the windowsill. And so again, we've got those two layers working and overlapping each other really nicely with that sort of detail. So the next thing we would do, and probably before we put this inside ARB in, definitely before, is we would insulate the stud. So we're filling this with insulation right through here. Okay, so if we were then to, because we've got two colors here showing two of the key layers, let's just color in the third one. So the third one is obviously the insulation itself, and that's going to need to be nice and continuous through the building. So it's continuous in this because we've got timber stud, which is also quite a good material from an insulating point of view, so we're going to color it yellow as well. We're going to assume that this is a timber window frame, so again that is nice and yellow, and then we're going to say that the gap between the two pieces of glass is also our insulated layer. So in that you can see that we've got a really nice straight line coming right through this whole building assembly that's actually keeping a nice balance between the conditioned air inside and the outside environment. And so that's really important. So now we need to add a few more details onto this just to finish this off. The next one we're going to do is we're going to add in a windowsill. And so in this one we're just doing sort of a pressed metal windowsill, and we're going to obviously fix it in underneath the window, however that does. I'm not again showing much detail here, but we want to leave a gap at the top of this brickwork where this is supported, and this could just be a hit and miss type filler that goes underneath here that allows this air movement to happen that we talked about previously. So now if you look at where the weather resistant layer on this is, it's the outside of the glazing, it's the outside of the window frame, it is the top of the windowsill, and that's working the water out and away from the building. And then we've got the inside one protecting behind this rain screen as well. So we've got this beautiful connection of sort of different layers happening that is working all together nice and seamlessly. So what about the inside finishes? So often what we have on the inside, on an external wall, is we'll need to put some services into this. And what we really don't want to do is interrupt this airtight layer that we've created here. So the best way to avoid that is to say that we're actually going to put our services. So this is like a PowerPoint, for instance, and we're going to place it inside of that. And we're going to put our finishes offset from that structure that run through here. So that's creating a service cavity through it in this position. And we're just going to take that up and create a sill board or bring the plasterboard round, however we manage that internal detail at that point. And then, you know, that needs some sort of timber structure or something in that position just to carry that sill board. And then we've got this gap through here. So we've now got an opportunity to increase our R value in this wall and give ourselves a little bit more performance. So we can also insulate this gap through here, around and obviously beside this PowerPoint as well. So now we've got an increase in our yellow layer. We've actually got more right through here, and this timber that comes through. So this is working really nicely now because the window frame is often one of the weakest points in the building. And by bringing this layer up and connecting to the top of the window frame, we're actually giving this window frame an insulation boost by putting more nice thermal material behind it as well. That's actually giving it some more thermal performance and insulating it from the colder, potentially, or hotter external air that we don't want coming into the inside of the building. So there you have it. There's the 3 layers shown and how this goes together in the ideal way. We've got the weather resistant barrier on the outside coming down the window, down the windowsill. We've got it in our internal cavity that wraps up and around our backstop to ensure that any moisture that gets in this is drained out the bottom. But we're also allowing ventilation to happen around this rain screen so that it's constantly being dried. We've got our insulated layer, so there's a gap between the 2 panes of glass. We've got a window frame that's acting as an insulator as well, as best as possible. We've got our timber stud fully insulated through here, and then we've got a service cavity that we're adding on the inside to give ourselves a boost. And then the 3rd layer, which is the airtight layer, is the wrap on the inside of the timber stud coming up and connecting with a wrap that we're connecting under the windowsill before we put it in, that wraps up and is taped to the other ARB on the inside. So I hope you found that useful. You can see that there's quite a lot of thought that goes into ensuring that this sort of detail works properly. And although it's simple, there are rules to it, and it's important that we follow the rules through so that we actually ensure that we do keep the water out from the building, because that's the one critical thing that's going to make your building feel. And then ensure that we've got the ability to store energy without losing it through these critical junctions in the building. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, I'd love to hear in the comments your thoughts on this, potentially different ways that you could rearrange this. Obviously, in the knowledge that this is generic and there are multiple different types of wall scenarios that this can fit within. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Thanks a lot. See you. Bye.